In 490 BC, the fate of Western civilization was hanging by a thread. On the shores of a quiet bay called Marathon, the Persian Empire, the greatest superpower the world had ever seen, unleashed its fury. Tens of thousands of soldiers, backed by cavalry and archers, landed with a single mission: to burn Athens to the ground and teach the upstart democracy a brutal lesson. Athens was hopelessly outnumbered. For every Greek soldier, there were at least 2 Persians. By all logic, the city should have been erased from history, its people enslaved, and its ideals extinguished. But what happened on that battlefield shocked the world and forever changed the story of freedom. The Athenians weren't professional soldiers. They were farmers, craftsmen, and ordinary citizens who picked up spear and shield because their home demanded it. Facing the most advanced army of their time, they stood shoulder to shoulder in the phalanx formation, a wall of bronze, discipline, and raw determination. And when the moment came, they didn't wait to be slaughtered by Persian arrows. They ran. They charged across the plain in full armor, a move so reckless the Persians thought it was suicide. Instead, it was genius. The clash was brutal, chaotic, and unforgettable. Against impossible odds, the Greeks shattered the Persian wings, encircled their elite center, and drove the empire's mighty army into the sea. When the dust settled, 6,400 Persians lay dead. Fewer than 200 Athenians had fallen. Marathon was more than a battle. It was proof that free citizens, fighting for their homes and their liberty, could defy an empire. It was the spark that lit Athens' golden age, and the moment that gave birth to the idea that ordinary people can change the course of history. The burning of Sardis was supposed to be a statement, a message that the mighty Persian Empire was not untouchable. But instead, it became a curse. The flames that consumed the city also consumed King Darius's patience. To torch one of his capitals was not just rebellion, it was blasphemy. And when a sacred temple went up in smoke, the insult cut even deeper. For the King of Kings, this was no longer about politics or tribute. It was personal. Herodotus tells us that Darius did something extraordinary. He fired an arrow into the sky and prayed for vengeance against Athens. And as if that weren't enough, he placed a servant at his side with one simple, terrifying job: to whisper in his ear before every meal, "Master, remember the Athenians." Years passed, but the king's anger never cooled. By 490 BC, Darius was ready. He assembled a fleet of 600 ships, an army tens of thousands strong, and 2 trusted commanders: Datis, a veteran admiral, and Artaphernes, his own nephew. Their orders were merciless: punish Eretria, punish Athens, and drag Greece to its knees. The first blow fell on Eretria. The Persians stormed the city, burned it, enslaved its people, and wiped it off the map. Then the fleet turned south, its sails filled with the salty Aegean wind, heading for a wide, open bay just 26 miles from Athens, Marathon. The choice of landing spot was no accident. Guiding them was Hippias, the exiled tyrant of Athens. Driven from power years earlier, he had thrown in his lot with Persia. Now, with bloodthirsty satisfaction, he led the invaders back to his homeland, eager to reclaim the throne. Marathon was perfect, a flat plain, ideal for Persian cavalry to run down enemy infantry. To the Persians, it looked like the battlefield had been chosen by the gods themselves. When news of the landing reached Athens, panic spread like wildfire. Every able-bodied man was called to arms. But this wasn't a professional army. These were farmers, potters, blacksmiths, and merchants. Each man brought his own armor, bought at his own expense: a heavy bronze breastplate, shin guards, a gleaming helmet, and most importantly, the great round shield known as the aspes. Together, with long spears bristling outward, they formed the phalanx, a living wall of bronze, designed not for maneuver, but for brutal, face-to-face combat. The numbers were grim: 9,000 Athenians and 1,000 allies from the tiny city of Plataea stood against at least 25,000 Persians. Worse, the Spartans, Greece's most feared warriors, would not march to help. Bound by a sacred festival, they promised to come later. But for now, Athens was on its own. So the citizen soldiers marched to Marathon and set up camp in the hills overlooking the Persian host. For days, The two armies stared at each other across the plain. The Persians waited, confident their cavalry would crush any Greek attack. They hoped time would stir rebellion inside Athens, with Hippias ready to step in as puppet ruler. The Athenians waited too, but their leaders were bitterly divided. Half of the generals argued it was madness to fight without Spartan reinforcements. The other half, led by Miltiades, demanded immediate battle. Miltiades was no ordinary commander. He had once served under the Persians and knew their methods. He also knew their weaknesses, and he warned the Athenians that delay was the true danger. Every day they waited, the risk of betrayal inside Athens grew. Better to risk everything now than to watch their city fall from within. The debate raged until a single man, Callimachus the war archon, cast the deciding vote. Athens would fight. Even then, Miltiades hesitated. He knew one thing could destroy them: the Persian cavalry. The phalanx was powerful, but vulnerable from the sides. If the horsemen attacked while the archers rained arrows, the Greeks would be slaughtered. And then, suddenly, the moment came. Scouts reported that the Persian cavalry had vanished from the field. To this day, historians aren't sure why. Perhaps they had been loaded onto ships to strike Athens from the sea. Perhaps they were sent to find water. Whatever the reason, their absence was the crack of light Miltiades had been praying for. It was time to gamble everything. As dawn broke, Miltiades ordered his army forward, but his plan was unlike anything the Persians expected. He thinned the Greek center, leaving only 4 ranks deep, and reinforced both flanks with crushing strength. To Persian eyes, the Greek line looked fatally weak in the middle. It was exactly what Miltiades wanted. The trap was set, and then he gave the most shocking command of all: run. When the Persian fleet thundered onto the shores of Marathon, their strategy seemed unstoppable. Archers would darken the sky with arrows, cavalry would sweep the flanks and smash the phalanx apart, and finally the infantry would deliver the killing blow. To the Persians, this was routine, the same formula that had crushed countless enemies across their vast empire. But in Athens, the situation was desperate. Every citizen who could afford armor stood in line. Shopkeepers, farmers, stonemasons, and potters transformed overnight into hoplites. Heavy infantrymen bristling with long spears and massive bronze shields. They were not professionals, but they were men with everything to lose. By their side stood 1,000 warriors from tiny Plataea, who marched to Marathon knowing their sacrifice might save Greece itself. The one ally they truly needed, Sparta, was absent. Bound by sacred ritual, the Spartans delayed, promising to arrive only after the full moon. That was too late. The Persians were here, on Greek soil, ready to strike. And so, outnumbered 3-1, the Athenians faced the impossible: stand their ground alone, or see their city, and their newborn democracy, obliterated in fire and chains. For days, the two armies stared at each other across the plain. From their camp in the hills, the Greeks could see the glitter of Persian armor stretching toward the sea. The invaders did not move. They did not need to. With their cavalry and endless supplies from the fleet, time was on their side. Every sunrise was another chance for Persian agents to stir rebellion inside Athens. Another chance for Hippias, the exiled tyrant marching with the Persians, to be welcomed back as ruler. Inside the Greek camp, tension boiled. 10 generals, one from each Athenian tribe, argued endlessly. Half warned it was madness to attack without Sparta's warriors. Better to wait, to hold the line, and pray that help would come. The others, led by Miltiades, insisted delay was more dangerous than battle. Every day we wait, he warned. Athens weakens. Better to gamble everything on the field than to watch the city fall from within. The stalemate dragged on until the war archon, Callimachus, cast the deciding vote. Athens would fight. Still, Miltiades waited. He knew the Persian cavalry was the real threat. The phalanx was a wall of bronze and spears, but it was slow. If cavalry struck the flanks or rear, the line would collapse in panic. An attack too soon would be suicide. And then came the moment that changed history. Scouts returned at dawn with stunning news. The cavalry was gone. No thundering hooves, no dust rising from the plain. Perhaps they had been loaded onto ships for a surprise assault on Athens. Perhaps they had been sent inland to find water. Whatever the reason, their absence left the Persian infantry exposed. Miltiades seized the chance. He ordered the line formed, but instead of the standard 8 ranks across, he made a daring change. The center, where the Persians had massed their best troops, was thinned to just 4 men deep. The men saved from the middle were pushed to the flanks, creating wings of terrifying strength. To Persian eyes, the Greek formation looked weak, vulnerable, a center begging to be crushed. It was bait, a trap. And then Miltiades gave the most shocking command of all. The hoplites, weighed down with bronze and wood, would not march. They would run. When Miltiades raised his arm, the plain erupted. 9,000 hoplites thundered down the slope, bronze shields flashing in the morning sun, spears angled like a forest of death. To the Persians, the sight was unbelievable. Greeks never ran into battle. Weighed down by 80 pounds of armor, a charge like this should have been madness. Yet the speed meant fewer men fell under the storm of Persian arrows. In moments, the gap between the armies closed with a crash that shook the ground. At the center were the Persian immortals, elite infantry in scale armor, waited. The trap seemed to work. The thin Greek middle bent under the weight of numbers. Hoplites staggered, shields buckling as arrows rained and spears clashed. For a heartbeat, it looked as if the Athenians had overreached, that their line might finally snap. But Miltiades had planned for this. The flanks, thick, unbreakable, smashed into the Persian wings. On the right, Athenian hoplites hacked through poorly armed archers and levies, their long spears piercing wicker shields as if they were paper. On the left, the allies from Plataea drove into the Persian line with equal fury. The wings folded, crumbling like sand under a wave. Step by bloody step, the Greeks began to close around the center. The Persians fought desperately. The immortals pressed forward, thinking the collapsing wings could be ignored. But suddenly they realized the horror. The Athenian flanks were not retreating. They were swinging inward. The thin center, instead of breaking, now held just long enough for the trap to snap shut. The battlefield turned into a slaughter pen. Surrounded on all sides, the best of Darius's army was crushed between walls of bronze. What followed was chaos. Men screamed as spears punched through armor, as hoplite shields drove them backward into the marshes and sea. Thousands tried to flee to the ships, only to be cut down at the water's edge. Blood and broken bodies littered the surf as Greek soldiers overturned Persian vessels, setting them ablaze. By the time the killing ended, over 6,400 Persians lay dead on the plain. In contrast, Athens had lost only 192 men, and Plataea just 11. A victory so lopsided it seemed almost divine. The survivors fled to their fleet and set sail, hoping to strike Athens directly before the victors could return. But Miltiades was not finished. Knowing what was at stake, he immediately ordered his exhausted soldiers to march the 26 miles back to the city. By the time the Persian ships appeared off the coast, the hoplites were already there, lined up, shields ready, daring the invaders to try again. The Persians hesitated, then turned away. The miracle of Marathon was complete. Against impossible odds, citizen soldiers had stopped the mightiest empire the world had ever seen. For Athens, it was more than survival. It was proof that free men, fighting for their own city, could defeat kings and tyrants. That idea would echo through history, whispered on every battlefield where the few stood against the many. The victory at Marathon was astonishing, but the danger was not yet over. As the sun set over the bloody plain, the Persian fleet, battered yet still formidable, unfurled its sails. Those ships that escaped the slaughter carried thousands of soldiers, and their commanders had not abandoned the invasion. Instead, they steered south around Cape Saunion, aiming to strike directly at Athens. If they reached the undefended city before its army returned, all would still be lost. Miltiades understood this instantly. Though his hoplites were drenched in sweat, their bodies torn with cuts and bruises, he gave the order, march. From the battlefield, 9,000 men turned toward Athens and began a desperate race against the Persian fleet. Armor clanked, sandals pounded the dirt, and every step carried the weight of a city's survival. It was 26 miles across rugged ground, and the march became a test of sheer will. Men who had fought hand to hand for hours now staggered forward under the blazing sun. But the thought of their families, their temples, and their freedom waiting in Athens drove them on. Messengers rode ahead to warn the city, while the column pressed through dust and exhaustion without pause. By the time the Persians rounded the cape and approached the Athenian harbor, they saw a sight that must have chilled them. A raid on the shore, shields gleaming, were the same hoplites who had destroyed their comrades at Marathon. Somehow, impossibly, the Athenians had beaten the fleet back to their own city. The Persians hovered offshore, seeking a weakness, but none appeared. To risk another landing against fresh defenses was unthinkable. Slowly, one by one, the ships turned away, retreating eastward across the Aegean. The invasion was over. Athens stood unbroken, saved not only by its courage at Marathon, but by the unyielding endurance of its citizens, who had marched, fought, and marched again in a single day of legend. For the first time in history, the invincible Persian Empire had been stopped. The Battle of Marathon was not merely a military victory. It was a psychological earthquake that shattered the illusion of Persian supremacy. Across Greece, whispers spread. The great king could be resisted, and freedom could triumph over tyranny. For Athens, the victory became the foundation of its golden age. In the years that followed, the city would transform into the cradle of democracy, philosophy, and art. The confidence born on the plains of Marathon fueled the rise of leaders like Themistocles and Pericles, the building of the Parthenon, and the flourishing of ideas that would shape Western civilization. Marathon was not just a battle, it was the spark of a cultural explosion. The legacy of Marathon endured far beyond Greece. For centuries, poets, historians, and statesmen invoked the name of the battle as a symbol of defiance. It stood as proof that a free people, united by conviction rather than by fear, could stand against the might of an empire. Even in modern times, the word marathon carries meaning. The endurance race named in memory of that desperate run to Athens reminds us of both human strength and human spirit. In the end, the Battle of Marathon was more than a clash of armies. It was a clash of ideals, freedom against despotism, self-rule against domination. And on that day in 490 BCE, on a narrow strip of Greek shoreline, freedom won. The echo of Marathon still speaks today. Whenever ordinary people stand against overwhelming odds, whenever the cause of liberty is defended against power, it asks a timeless question. When the moment comes, will we have the courage to run toward the battle, as the Athenians once did?